Namaste, everyone. Welcome to today's guest talk. The title today is Education and Aspiration to Become a Bourgeois or a Samurai. Our guest speaker today is Ms. Nilanjana Moitra, who is a development professional and an applied researcher, having graduated from Tagore's Green University in Shantiniketan. Early in her career, she navigated various roles as a fellow and employee amidst the country's senior bureaucracy. Disillusioned with how the world works, she decided to delve deeper into the realm of education. She undertook an M.Phil on employability issues amongst the higher educated, underserved youth in India, followed by a Ph.D. in human agency in the domain of higher education. For a living, Nilanjana works with the United Nations now. For her passion, she reads and introspects what in education could change and how. Nilanjana ma'am, thank you so much for being with us today. Uh, we look forward to a great session with you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Arunima. Thanks, Ramesh sir, for the opportunity to talk today, speak today. I would like to share my screen. There's a small kind of a presentation that I have prepared to kind of support this talk today. So, okay. Okay. So, the question today that I'm asking is education and aspiration. I mean, how and what should we choose as we become more and more educated individuals and a world over? And where should our aspirations take us to become bourgeois or a samurai? So I draw inspiration from Sri Aurobindo's poem written during 1906 to between 1906 and 1909, which is titled Bourgeois or the Samurai. And I am, like Arunima mentioned, a development professional, also a researcher and a follower of Sri Aurobindo, but I'm a novice to all of this. So this is more like a discussion than a talk. And together with all the participants here, I would like to explore this topic more today rather than deliver a talk. I don't think myself capable of that. So moving forward from here, okay, is my screen? Yes, my screen is working. So I have been struggling with this question of what is wrong within our education system, which had led me to take up an M.Phil and later on a Ph.D. research in the domain of higher education. Because clearly education is not leading to a more sustainable world. We are manufacturing more like similar products, which also Paulo Freire talks about. It is not diminishing inequity as much as rather increasing it. And most of the countries with the highest GDP have also the highest carbon footprints, sometimes borrowed carbon footprints, which is worse because it means that some of the other countries which are lesser modernized, lesser able to access the fruits of modernization are experiencing worse climatic consequences. So these kind of questions as to where education is actually leading us kept bothering me. And I eventually landed upon this Sri Aurobindo's poem, Bourgeois and the Samurai, where he talks about how two Oriental nations, both of which were kind of influenced and conquered by the European civilization and felt the impact of Western ideas, India and Japan, both of these Oriental nations, how they reacted to this kind of European civilization having a kind of domination over their culture. So the smaller nation, which was Japan, became one of the mightiest powers, whereas India, being far more, having a far more original culture, more ancient and splendid past, kind of became more dependent on the foreigner and was unable to realize its greatest potentials. So in this poem further, Sri Aurobindo talks about what actually impacted this major difference between the two nations. So Japan, when influenced by these Western ideals, remained faithful to her ancient spirit and merely took over certain reforms in its own social and political domain. Whereas India, uh, on India, this thought, the Western philosophy, the European culture, had a more powerfully disintegrating and destructive influence. So Sri Aurobindo talks about the spirit in man which molds his fate. It is the spirit of a nation which determines its history. Eventually, in my discussion today, I will come up with the concept of human agency, which has also been my area of research. And the spirit in man and the spirit of the nation that Sri Aurobindo talks about is one of the most crucial factors that, besides the other structural arrangements around us, affects our individual fate as well as the fate of our nation. So, Sri Aurobindo says that in India, besides the disintegrating effects that the Western civilization had, there was a new kind of upper strata which came up, which evolved, which he termed as the bourgeois. And this was not native to the Indian culture. This was definitely a foreign brought in concept. So the major difference between India and Japan, the contrast between how the civilizations grew, and mind it, he is referring to the 19th century here, where actually these two nations had a very contrasting economy and a very contrasting political strength. So in India, the bourgeois, and in Japan, the samurai, that was the single difference he states. So what exactly is bourgeois and what is a samurai? So in order to understand who or what is a samurai, we can start with how Sri Aurobindo defines a bourgeois. So the bourgeois is the average contented middle class, and a lot of us here will find reflection in his thoughts from our own very own daily lives. This is how the education system, not just in the pre-independence period, but there is a lingering effect in our present education system also, which is kind of pushing us towards becoming bourgeois individuals. So he says that the average contented middle class citizen is a bourgeois who is in love with his life, and above all is in love with the comforts of his life. So in the public domain, he likes to maintain an external order, a moderation, a decorum. He does not like innocuous excitement that has to be very calculated. He has high ideals of justice, liberty, reform, enlightenment. An occasional sacrifice of money, leisure, or other precious things for this justice, liberty, and enlightenment, in which he believes, he's ready to let go of some money, of some leisure, and some other precious things, uh, and has a keen zest for the reputation of such sacrifice that he's making. So he's okay with letting go of little money or leisure to kind of maintain the justice, liberty, and enlightenment he believes in. But this cannot be of an extreme nature, of an extreme measure. So he believes in this comfortable sense of personal righteousness. So this much is my duty. I am done with this, and that is good enough for my own moral or uh, religious values. He's a man of peace and orderliness. In every way, this bourgeois is a respectable man. He has decorous virtues. He is decent in his indulgence of his vices. So in the indulgence of vices, there again he's very moderate. So a little bit of probably fun, a little bit of probably uh, uh, you know vices, as we would call it, is okay and fine with him, as long as he is able to conceal this. Uh, Often absolutely honest, but almost always as honest as an enlightened self-interest will permit. So even that honesty, there is the strong sense of self-interest that limits his sense of honesty. He is definitely a good earner, a conscientious worker, a thoroughly safe and reliable citizen. So these are all the good qualities, or you can say the qualities of a bourgeois that Sri Aurobindo is describing. What else does the bourgeois value? A little art, a little poetry, a little religion, a little scholarship, a little philosophy. All these are excellent ingredients in his life, and gives him an air of decorous refinement to his surrounding. But we have to mind it, they must not be carried too far or interfere with the great object of his life. What is the great object of the life of a bourgeois? It is to earn money, to clothe and feed one's family, educate one's son to the high pitch of BA and MA degree. This Sri Aurobindo is referring to in those days, 1905 to 1906. Marry off one's daughter decently, have a high rank in the service of a profession or the government, and have a credible and respectable stature in the society. But if there is any extremity, he shrugs his shoulder over it. He brushes it aside with a word of mad or eccentricism. So a bourgeois is very careful about maintaining the duties of his life, which are mentioned here. But Sri Aurobindo goes on to mark how this admirable creature also has defects and limitations. So what are the defects and limitations of this bourgeois? For great adventures, tremendous enterprises, lofty achievements, high ideals, the storm and stress of mighty and eventful periods, such as in the national activity during that time, the freedom movement, he is unfit. These things are for the heroes. So the bourgeois believes these things are for the heroes, the martyrs, the criminals, the criminals also mind it here, the enthusiasts, the degenerates, geniuses, and men of exaggerated virtue. The bourgeois most of the time is ready to enjoy the fruits of the work of such rebels when it is done, but while it is ongoing, he opposes and hinders them, often rather than helping. So how was this bourgeois class, which Sri Aurobindo says is new to this country, is foreign, is alien to this country, to India, to the culture of India? How did this take birth in the middle class of this country, in the middle class section of this country? So he says that bourgeois is a creation of the British policy, English education, and Western civilization. And where all can we find this bourgeois? In the Senate and Syndicate, in the Legislative Council and District Board or Municipal Corporation, in Congress, in conference, in the services, in professions, in literature, in scholarship, even in religion to that extent. He's everywhere with his well-regulated mind, his unambitious ideals, his snug little corner of culture, his education, and his enlightenment. So society kind of created a model around this bourgeois where politics molded, where even politics was molded in this image, and education was confined within his limits, literature, religion stamped with the seal of the bourgeois. So we see that the Western education system, the Western civilization, it influenced to create an entire ecosystem of the bourgeois mindset around us individuals of India. So this, though, we are also aware of Macaulay's Minute, where he very clearly has declared that the British rule did not need scholars, did not need, was in no need of great inventors. It was only clerks that the British rulers were looking at. The British education had had great contempt for the sannyasi, for the Gurukul system of education which prevailed in our country, in ancient India. And there was an extreme strenuous focus on the achievement of worldly goods, admiration of success as the finest work of the creator. So, of course, what happened was the Vyasa and the Valmiki were forgotten, and the idle tales of Smiles and Sir Arthur, random individuals of the British education system, they became the instructors of our youth. And it was in their ideology that our entire education system started to get molded. What were the values of this English education system? Our brains were as full of liberty as our lives were empty of it. We read and talked so much of political rights, but never as much realized it. We learned science without observation, literature by rote, philosophy as a lesson to be learned by heart, not as a guide to truth. We patterned our speeches and essays about social reform, yet had no idea of the nature of the society. And never was education more remote for all education truly denotes. So, this education that started springing up was far, far away from how India had uh, truly known truly known education as. So, the entire system now focused on making, or rather glorifying, the rewards of life on certain merits and outward signs. So, what were these outward signs? An university degree, knowledge of English, possession of a post in government service or a professional diploma, a government title, European clothes, sleek appearances, a big house full of English furniture. These were purely the conventional signs of a successful life, of a bourgeois life. And this was what most of the middle class individuals in the 19th century, as Sri Aurobindo puts it, trying to strive at. But we should stop and question here, are these still not the same aspects that even the education system today is motivating us to aspire towards? So the degree that he's talking about, the university degree, did not necessarily denote a good education, nor the knowledge of English, a wide culture, or successful living. But neither did a government post administrative capacity, nor the diploma special fitness for a profession. But wealth, success, and certain outward signs of a facile respectability had become, to our new civilized and refined society, the supreme tests of the man. So, this was what our success depended on then. To some extent, sadly, this is what our success, our motivation, our aspirations from education uh, are today as well. So, what does the modern education still, do to us? Sri Aurobindo is talking about the princely spirit, the eagle's vision, the lion's heart. These were things that might be buried away by the memories of the great Indian rulers of the past. So, the British education system tried that these stories, these of our ancient legacy that we had, these should be just buried away as memories. The Indian mechanician, the engineer, architect, artist, craftsman, they all got a notice of dismissal because the industrial life was coming up, and India was just to cater to to the growth of England's business. So, and thirdly, whatever India needed, a beneficent England would just generously provide in the name of trade. So, it kind of motivated individuals to have a very relaxed life. He puts it as sit at ease under his palm tree, or gladly singing till his fields rejoicing that heaven had sent him a ruling nation so greedy to do him good. What was wanted was not Indian artisans or Indian captains of industry, but plenty of small shopkeepers and big middlemen to help conquer and keep India as a milch cow for British trade and British capital. So, if we look at these factors even today, we do not find enough reflection of our cultural history, of these stories of our past, of our glorious past, in our curriculum as yet today. When we talk about how the Britishers did not want us to become engineers, architects, artisans, craftsmen, we know that India has highly missed the industrial revolution. We have actually leaped on to the service revolution in our country, and about England providing through her generous system, through a free trade system, we are still believing in a system of doling out to the underserved, instead of providing them with the rightful education through which they can become these pioneers in the field of science, art, music, whatsoever. So now Sri Aurobindo talks about how and why India must recover her faculty for self-sacrifice, courage, and aspiration. But for that to happen, the middle class must, by a miracle, be transfigured. The natural breeding ground of the bourgeois, it must become the breeding ground of the samurai. And how is that to happen? It must cease, in fact, to be a middle class and turn into an aristocracy. But again, not an aristocracy of birth or landed possession, not of wealth or commercial enterprise, but of character and action. So India must recover her faculty for self-sacrifice, courage, and high aspiration. So this is an attempt towards a spiritual transformation. Very briefly, what were these aspects of the aristocratic spirit of ancient India? We know about Buddha, who gave up his royal state, wealth, luxury, wife, child, and parents so that mankind could be saved. We know about the story of Prahalada, where he buried himself under the mountain, whelmed in the seas, tortured by the poison of 1,000 venomous serpents, yet stayed true to his call, stayed calmly true to his faith. We know about Savitri's story. We know about how Shivi, when a bird came for protection, could give off his own limb to save an animal. So these are the numerous stories. These are the numerous. It's the milk of our Mother India's breast that should have been feeding us to become the samurais that Sri Aurobindo envisions us to become. So, what should be this new that Sri Aurobindo talks about? This new nationalism this is again in the 1900s that he's talking about, is the very antithesis, the complete and vehement negation of the old. The new seeks to replace the bourgeois by the samurai and to shatter the prison house which the 19th century made of our motherland. The old looked onto the power and interests of the educated, enlightened middle class and shrank from the ignorant and the uneducated. So yes, even the education system of those times shrank from the underserved because lest it should touch impurity, it had more interest in the powers of the middle class, emphasized on the so-called enlightenment of the middle class. But the new today overleaps every barrier. It calls to the clerk at the counter, the trader in his shop, the peasant at his plow. So Sri Aurobindo says that now this country can no more be stopped. As the new, the spiritual strength of this country is taking a rebirth. The middle class will be the the cradle where this new birth will take place, and it will call out to every section. It will overcome every barrier. In the colleges, in the books of the schoolboy, it will touch the child in his mother's arms. A secluded zenana will be thrilled by its voice, and its eye searches the jungle for the santal and travels the hills for the wild tribes of the mountains. So my research focus area has been on tribes, and when I encountered these lines, I was overwhelmed because this is one of the very rarest of the places where Sri Aurobindo talks about this population of our country. And very interestingly, he specifically mentions the Santal tribe, how this new searches the jungle for the Santal. And recently, the first tribal president of our country, who was elected, is also from the Santal community. So this line actually excited me. So it cares nothing about the age or the sex or the caste or the wealth or education. It just, it spurns aside all demands for property, qualification, or a certificate of literacy. So this spirit, the spirit of the samurai, which is now bound to come to this country, Sri Aurobindo is talking about that. So when I work in the realm of education, do I see a few signs of this new spirit taking over? Yes, I do. Because the world of business we see has now matured beyond the industrial and information revolution. And at this stage, there's a social revolution amongst the younger generation that we can see. This generation is caring less about their survival or the comfort comfort, and is increasingly embracing a quality life. So we see there's loads of startups coming up where people from IITs and IIMs and even the top-notch Harvard returns are coming back to work on the issues of the land, to work on smaller issues of the communities, which really matter for our country. And they are letting go of hefty salaries to actually invest their potentials, their minds, their capacities into building something really worthwhile and new for our country. Innovative business roles like chief belief officer, innovation evangelist, futurologist, change agents, happiness engineers, to name some of the few, are rapidly evolving future jobs. And the massification of higher education across the world is another reality that we can no longer ignore. These are some of the signs that even businesses are now looking forward to innovative business roles. So, which means that there is more recognition of the requirement for a different kind of education, which will be creating a cadre of such individuals for our country, not just for our country, the world over, but here specifically because Sri Aurobindo talks about the samurai in India, so focusing on the Indian education system here. So what can education do to create samurais? With human well-being becoming central to business ideas, there's a question that we need to ask. Are our universities prepared to take a dynamic leap? Are we liberating the higher education system from its shackles of safe, mediocritic progress and creating an acceptance to, kind of relearn, accept that we do not know enough, explore, have researches? It may also include learning from indigenous knowledge systems, engaging locally with the local knowledge systems and taking them at the global level, and doing research which should be aimed at revolutionizing the curriculum and pedagogy of universities, not just the school education system, even the universities to that extent. So, by engaging with local communities and delving into local problems, the future of job is also about making local college knowledge globally available. Uh, you know, uh, so the future of jobs, the future of business is also lies in the problems of the local communities, because as industrialization becomes more and more of a reality, as artificial intelligence becomes more and more of an established fact, production of goods, production of I would say comfort goods, the necessities, they would become more and more easier. So where would the future of our businesses lie? They would lie in the bespoke problems of individuals within communities, and of smaller communities, of smaller hamlets, of individuals. So these are also the areas that the universities will eventually need to try and work on, try and explore. This requires the constant evolution of the higher education system through, of course, enlarged frameworks, include fresh notions, and constantly reclassify and reorganize our thinking. So this is what is expected of the higher education system in order to create individuals who will be more sensitive, individuals who uh, who will be doing better than the bourgeois. This was a framework that I had used in my research to understand, because my research was focused on the agency of tribal individuals. So this spirit that Sri Aurobindo talks about, the agency, the grit of individuals, my research focused on tribals in the higher education domain, and how much are they able to assert their agency, what are the barriers, what are the factors that are enabling them, and understanding the entire process that takes place. So here we can understand this agency as not just that of a tribal community, but agency of us individuals in India as general. So when I talk about Adivasi identity and aspiration, it is also the identity and aspiration of Indians, the culture of India, the identity that we hold, the cultural uh, the the cultural values that we have had in our ancient India, our language, our culture, our local economies, how politics and policies are kind of interacting with them, and what kind of role are the institutions, these spaces that help us, assert our identity, discuss our culture. What effect do these spaces have us on us as individuals? And when we are part of the higher education system, the higher education governance system can be understood through 4 domains. Research is a major domain of the higher education system, community outreach programs, curriculum pedagogy, and the administrative function. So how much of this Indian identity, our ethnic identity, has a scope uh, in 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 this the 4 aspects of higher education? How much does our language, our culture, our economy get a reflection in the curriculum and pedagogy? How much is the higher education system, higher education institution, reaching out to our local communities, not just trying to identify their problems, but also kind of giving them the scope and opportunity to contribute their part to the education system? So, there are such beautiful systems that exist within the tribal communities. The system of education. How would the how would a kid learn about sustainable silk rearing? So, the parent would teach the child that this is the right time to let the cocoon out, and we have heard about concepts such as guilt free silk, where we let the cocoon just leave its the worm just leave its cocoon like that. So there are such sustainable practices in lac cultivation, where the parents teach their kids that how for every season they should give a resting period to a tree, and how they communicate with the biodiversity around them when they collect a plant, when they for a medicinal purpose, say a medicinal purpose, they would worship the plant first. They would only collect that much as they can in one breath, so that these are sustainable practices, so that there is no greed involved in the collection of a medicinal plant, and the entire biodiversity is also preserved and protected. So, and this is specifically about the tribal community. We have such wonderful practices within the community, within the rural areas of India at large. So why aren't these beautiful uh, practices, cultures, coming out and becoming a part of the education system in general? Aren't these the aspects that are actually going to contribute to a sustainable world? Because just reading about sustainability in a book, or just asking kids to draw a green uh, scene, a painting, or things like activities like that, is not what is actually going to make us close enough with the biodiversity, so as to kind of motivate us to protect it. So these are some of the aspects within the higher education system that needs to get modified if we are aspiring towards producing samurais out of our education system, rather than having the bourgeois. So the interaction of higher education with community agency brings us to an important question, whether tribals within the higher education domain have the agents. So here it is about tribals, but again, we can have the similar question for whether Indians within the higher education domain have the agency or freedom of taking part in the processes of defining and determining their own development. So what kind of development is good for an Indian? How do I perceive my life? What do I want my life to be like? What does my spiritual background tell me? These are the questions that should define my path of development. So is higher education system giving me that much of agency freedom to ask these questions? Sometimes education itself does not ensure agency, but also contributes in unanticipated ways. So for example, in the tribal domain, we find that youth who are second and third generation educated are imagining alternative futures for themselves. So they are actually trying to integrate traditional knowledge systems with the modern education, modern scientific researches. So, this capacity to understand our own culture better and make sense of these threads of sustainability and universal indigenous knowledge systems is something that is a scope that education should be giving us today. So we as Indians, we having our own specific culture of the country, as second or third generation educated, are actually now raising such questions, are actually now uh, trying to kind of ask these questions from the higher education system. That's why we are breaking off from the traditional job roles and getting into various kind of social startups as well. So what needs to be done? Indigenous agency in higher education comprising of curricular and pedagogical reforms can at least make them more representative. So components of these aspects need to be integrated with the curriculum and the pedagogy that will be more representative of our indigenous sentiments and appreciative of our traditional knowledge systems. Researches are more required in the domain of curriculum development regarding, civic community engagements that should be in place, and such researches need to be promoted. Indigenous voices regarding how the university environment can be made more non-discriminatory. So if we move on to our very ancient India, the entire system of casteism, the entire system of discrimination was again a very foreign concept to us. So how did these dilution take place? These are the questions that also need to be explored if we actually want to move on to a discrimination-free India. So that the curriculum can be made more inclusive, and exploring how can the university engage with sustainable indigenous knowledge systems, and as well as the changing aspirations of vulnerable communities and the youth of India today. So the higher education system needs to channelize itself to also be able to address the changing aspirations of a changing generation of youth today. Our education system will create samurais if education can become a platform providing us with the agency, the spirit that Sri Aurobindo talks about, to understand our history and biography, so that we can acknowledge our cultural ethos of universalism and amalgamate that with the modern education system. So that non-tribals or people from non-vulnerable communities could acknowledge the ideas that our lives have had socio-cultural influences that have kind of molded us to have a discriminatory influence on the secluded, on the marginalized. Uh, at this stage, what the universities choose to propagate is very important, because the new India's direction uh, for development will be propagated by what our universities choose to propagate. Thus, it is with great care that the central ideas in the education must be chosen by our universities, because that is where our future depends. Closing my discussion here with with these lines from Sri Aurobindo's poem. The new nationalism is an attempt at a spiritual transformation of the 19th century Indian. It is a notice of dismissal or at least of suspension to the bourgeois. So it is an attempt of a spiritual transformation. It is a notice for dismissal or at least of suspension to the bourgeois and all his ideas and ways of work. A call for men who will dare and do impossibilities. And he talks here about the men of extremes, the men of faith, the prophets, the martyrs, the crusaders, the rebels, the desperate adventurers, the reckless doers, the initiators of revolutions. So let us not just be adventurers to the Himalayas as we are becoming today. Most of the youth are now loving the idea of trekking to the hills, which is at sometimes we also do it very non-responsibly, and we can see the disastrous effects that it is bringing onto the uh, townships of the Himalayas. So we could rather, venture into this huge adventure, this great adventure of taking our country to heights through uh, improving our own selves, moving out of our comfort zone of a bourgeois life, becoming desperate adventurers and reckless doers and initiators of revolutions, so that we are again able to reap the fruits of another revolution in our country, and uh, kind of bring Sri Aurobindo's dream to a reality. So thank you so much. I would like to stop here.
Thank you, Nilanjana ma'am. That was really great, very interesting and insightful, and ended on an inspiring note. Thank you so much.
Thank
Let's
you.
see if we have any questions or any inputs from the audience. Yes, Dr. Sangeeta, please go ahead.
Hi, Nilanjana. Thank you for your presentation. I want to ask you a very basic question. What is the point? What is the objective of education?
What is the objective of education?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking the whole presentation about education. So what is the actual point of education?
Well, you would say it is critical thinking, but here, because I am quoting Sri Aurobindo, so I'm kind of drawing a parallel from his poem. So I would say it's about raising your soul, raising your realizing that there is a greater objective to achieve than the whatever education so far has told us, that it's only about livelihood. So something beyond that, beyond the basic livelihood, beyond the basic comforts of life, to go uh, 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 towards achieving a world which is more harmonious, I would say. And that would come through a rational, critical thinking mind.
And do you think then that the only way to get a rational, critical thinking mind is through education in a formalized setting?
No, definitely not. Education cannot be, that is our notion of education, that there has to be a building, there has to be a structure, there has to be a set of teachers. That's why I mention the domain of tribal education here, because that has really been an eye-opener for me. For the tribals, there is no such, traditionally there were no such concept of education in a very closed institutional setting. Education has always been the capacity to live your life beautifully for them, for the indigenous. And they have always learned from each other. The elders of the community, the parents have taught their kids the values that were integral to living a good life, good as they would describe it, because good for the tribals is also a very harmonious coexistence with the biodiversity. So definitely education within the four walls or within an institutional structure is a very modern concept which has been brought in and fed into our minds. And we have kind of started believing that it has to be books and curriculum and a set of rules and a set of lessons to be learned and exams to be passed. That is, that's hardly education.
I know that. I've worked with the tribals directly. I know what you're saying, but what I'm asking is something slightly different. One of the ways, the most actually basic way that the British came in and took over India was through language, the English language, which is it influences culture, and that directly influences the mind and thought processes. Now, the English language has got its own very specific structure, and that structure, obviously, when you learn in English, your mind starts to think in that way. So for me, when I think about education, I don't think of it, I think of it as a cultural thing rather than a pedagogy of even national development. It's much more of a personality development. And the personalities in India are so diverse and so multidimensional that to be able to put it in a general standardized program is, I think, impossible and also not advisable, because you lose the real essence of the being and the macro organism of the community through general customized rules. So as much as we can, I think we can structure things, I think the real thing is to go away from the structure, as your last slide said, become the personalities of the crusaders, the rebels, the activists, the innovators and the revolutionaries, basically. And only then can you really come up with something that maybe we need something very different, not just a progression from what already exists, but maybe a whole new way of thinking of things, of looking at things, and of life in general, which has not been done yet. Because when you bring these personalities together in inclusivity, then you get something really interesting, in my opinion, something different and something really interesting. So I just wanted to say that, but thank you.
Yeah, right. Very rightly said. I mean, my experience majorly comes from working with the tribals in the domain of education, and like you've rightly pointed out that every individual is different. So these are some of the characteristics which were always respected in these communities. So I cannot have an experience of how the ancient Indian culture operated. Because there is very limited evidence of it, or probably I've not read enough in that regard. But the tribal communities, even if you visit them today, there are still glimpses of what education meant to them. So this bespoke model of education is what precisely they had been following for generations. So if a child was specifically interested in a certain skill, it could be art or something very specific, that is what was cultivated, cultured, and encouraged by the community. So that's why the institutional model of education was something that they never accepted. And in the education system of India today, that's a major kind of hindrance for us to be able to increase their gross enrollment ratios, because they still don't subscribe to such institutionalized systems of education. But probably as educators, we have not been open enough to be able to accept that there is a lot that we can go back and learn from these communities. So yes, there is a lot of scope of research and mutual learning in this domain, I would believe.
Thank you, ma'am. We have some lovely words of appreciation for you in the chat box.
Thank you.
And one question as well. I'll take up that. Before that, someone has raised the hand. Hitomi Ashta, please go ahead.
Okay, hello. Good evening from Japan. This is Hitomi's husband, Ashok Ashta, speaking, actually. And just thank you for a wonderful talk, which inspired some thinking. And just to add to your words, and especially because I'm in Japan and because you brought up Japan and the university system. So in India, as Dr. Sai also mentioned, we are greatly influenced by the English language, at least at the university level. For example, the University of Delhi, even when it teaches mathematics or physics or business or any other subject, conducts classes in English, and it brings in the English, the British or the Western values system as part of what is being taught in the classroom. Here in Japan, university education is conducted in the local language. So physics is taught in Japanese, chemistry is taught in Japanese, business is taught in Japanese. So everything. So I get the feeling that perhaps language and even your diagram that you had earlier, the tribal on the right hand side of that round thing, you had language as one of those important factors that decides agency. And if they have not only the tribals, but people from different parts of India, when they have to go into an education system, especially at the higher education institutes, the HEIs, they have to suddenly change their value system to, and you said tribals resist this, to the English medium. Now, English does have its advantages, but just adding to what you were saying, language plays a central role. And in Japan, just wanted to bring to everybody's attention that because you talk about the samurai and you talk about Japan, that it's all done in Japanese. That's all. Just adding.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this addition. Small, addition from my side is about the language aspect. As you rightly mentioned, it's very crucial. But equally crucial is the content part. So the content of the curriculum or the pedagogy. Why am I mentioning this? Is there have been experiments where say with the state governments, sometimes international organizations like UNICEF and all have translated the existing curriculum of certain government schools into the languages, into the tribal languages of say that particular state. For example, Jharkhand state here in India, which is a pretty decently tribal majority state. So what happens is, although the kids are able to relate better because the language is their mother tongue, but the content is equally important. So for example, if you are talking about traffic lights in a tribal language and trying to explain it to the kids, it doesn't fit the context because a kid living in a rural area has not seen a traffic light, probably doesn't know how does this entire system of roads and traffic signals work. So just communicating to them in their mother tongue wouldn't suffice the entire purpose well enough. As the previous Sangeeta, I forgot her name, as she was mentioning that each individual is different. So similarly, each community, each cluster, each of these communities have a different culture that also kind of needs to get reflected. I know it's a mammoth task because mass production, mass education, everything in a mass scale is always easier to manage. That's a reality. But then if we actually kind of give more authority, power, and respect and faith, we put in more faith in the communities where we are actually going to intervene and teach the kids, rather than institutionalizing them in buildings and structures, involve these communities to come forth and teach, kind of become a part of the education system. That's a better way to go about it, because that also brings in a sense of comfort for the not just for the kids, for also university level individuals. And of course, there has to be some basic science, some basic global standard of teaching that should definitely be a part of the curriculum. But beyond that, there also has to be an aspect of life skill. There also has to be an aspect of the cultural aspects that needs to find reflection in the education system for them to be able to accept education as something which is their own, and then probably a part of it as what also needs to be learned so that they can sustain in the world, they can kind of earn a livelihood in the world. So there has to be a good combination of the both. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. The question in the chat box is from Akshay. How can we go from being a bourgeois to a samurai?
Okay. Thank you for your question, Akshay. Start with reading Sri Aurobindo's poem. He clearly mentions about the revolution, and that has to take place first in our minds, I suppose. Develop that grit in ourselves to be able to challenge the set norms, to be able to question. It is definitely also a spiritual process, because and that is what education should have been teaching us. That is what something that is in the end the secret of all. In the end, we all want a happy life. In the end, we all want a sustainable future for ourselves. So from bourgeois to samurai, it's again it's a struggle. It's also a spiritual quest, but it has to start with the mind. It has to start in our heart, and the ability to question whatever is the set norm, the ability to sometimes defy the set norms, challenge set norms, and make nerves of steel for ourselves, probably. But the best is to read the poem first, I suppose. I could only say that much. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Rishikesh, sir.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
I want to make a small addition. The talk has mostly concentrated on the education of the mind, and as we are children of the mother and Sri Aurobindo, we understand that the education has so many different dimensions, like education of the body, and the vital, and besides the spiritual,
Physical, yeah.
and all that must be also integrated into the proposed improvements, so that it becomes a little wholesome to the child and the personality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishikesh. I would propose that we start a discussion session, say one day of the week, specifically on the subject of education, as proposed, guided by Sri Aurobindo and Mother. It's a huge, vast subject in itself. So probably we could look forward to something like that.
Your thoughts are credible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sangeeta, you had raised the hand.
Just have a quick question. What are your thoughts about, because I know a bit about the Aurobindo schools. I've taught at Mothers International and in Delhi. And what are your thoughts about examinations? Because in the school in Pondicherry, they don't have examinations.
See, it's a difficult question, because it's not just about Sri Aurobindo school. As we had also, the government had also at a point of time thought about CCE, the continuous evaluation of students till the class 8th, where this rule of no exams till class 8th had come into place. The difficulty is not with having exams or not having exams, rather than having that question. The point here is, on what do we want to evaluate kids? I mean, how and why and for what purpose do we want to evaluate kids? So as you had asked this question rightly, that what is the purpose of education? So is the purpose of education clear in the mind of the teacher? Is the purpose of education clear in the mind of the government that is making a policy, in the bureaucracy that is making a policy? If that objective is clear, the kind of examinations that we would have would be very different. Right now, if we are only testing memory as a skill, then the system of exams which is there makes sense. But if we have an objective of growing individuals who are rebellious scientists, individuals who are rebellious artists, each in their own form. You've taught at Mothers International, so of course Tara Di is such a brilliant example, of an individual who was given the scope of doing what she wanted and how she has excelled in it. But it requires a tremendous amount of energy and effort from our side. One of the difficulties today is that even parents are occupied and in several other things, and sometimes think that the school education system is a ventilation for them, where the kids are sent and then are taken care of. So if we actually want to customize education to that extent, there has to be a greater involvement of the parents, of the community members. Again, coming back to the tribal community, that's why, because children here were, I mean, not in today's scenario, but originally were thought to be as communities properties or communities offsprings. So the entire community would put effort into raising that kid as an ideal for their community and their culture. So that effort has to come from a holistic way. Simply banning examinations might not be of great help, but again, kids in the Pondicherry school are doing wonderful because they have an entire ecosystem around them. So if we can actually have schools which are that diligently looking into every kid, every individual to that extent, the examination system wouldn't make any sense.
I didn't mean that the examination system should be banned. What I actually meant was that in Scandinavian countries, they are moving away from the examination system into evaluating groups and projects, and how children work together as teams and groups rather than individual evaluations. So there's that. And also it's really interesting because in schools in Scandinavia, they've started teaching Sanskrit because they've realized the effect that the language Sanskrit has on the mind and the body, not just the mind, but the body itself, and the sound, of course. So these things come into play. And yes, you're right. So basically, what I've understood, the real essence of education is community. It's really about developing the community through the individuals within the community, rather than actually the other way around. So that's something that I know that a lot of progressive Western nations are really looking at, because like you said, they've looked at things that did not work, and they're now trying to come up with something different, and it's an experiment. They don't
Yes,
have
absolutely.
they don't have any like solutions. And I think that's the time that we're really living in. And for me, what Sri Aurobindo and the mother really did was allowing us the thought and the mindset to move into experimentation, because this time is going to be a time of experimentation rather than of hard, fast solutions, because of the rate of change and adaptation and change again and change. So I think that for me is the essence of development rather than just education.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr.
Thank you.
Bijlani, I request you to share your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Arunima. One could go on and on with what all is wrong with the system of education, what all needs to be done, and that not enough has happened. But instead of that, I'll just focus on a few positive things which Nilanjana has beautifully brought out. And the hope is in the younger generation itself, which is showing in increasing numbers positive changes, which are very encouraging. As she said, more and more young people are not looking at life as it has been conventional, or what one may call the bourgeois point of view, that is trying to basically focus on earning enough, looking after their own family properly, and then adding to that a bit in terms of ideas, reflections, thinking, and sometimes a little action by way of charity and so on, which is on one hand designed to appease their own conscience and to some extent establish reputation as a good, respectable person in society. They are no longer satisfied with that. They are going beyond that. They're thinking beyond themselves, trying to combine career with meaning in life, looking beyond their own little selves and uh, trying to uh, look for something which will bring real value to the society, not just in appearance, but in real terms. And for that, if a great sacrifice is necessary, many of them are giving up very lucrative jobs. So this is something which is very helpful, and especially the new titles which I had never heard of earlier, which he talked about, like the chief belief officer, innovation evangelist, change agent, happiness engineer, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are the type of things which show the way we are thinking and going beyond the conventional mode of thinking, the conventional mindset. It is such barrier breakers and rebels that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have talked about and have visualized to be there in larger numbers as a result of the evolutionary thrust. So, whatever we are doing, yes, in that direction, maybe contributing a bit, but then a lot seems to be happening irrespective of our efforts as a result of the evolutionary thrust. So the future is bright, and it is persons like Nilanjana who are giving it a further push and stimulating those who are uh, the sort of opinion makers of the society, teachers, parents, and the younger generation, which needs to be reassured that yes, it is on the right path. So thank you, Nilanjana, for uh, giving this valuable talk, which I'm sure will
Thank you.
inspire many of us to step beyond our comfort zones and do something which is really meaningful and which will pave the way for giving a practical shape to the better world that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have visualized. Thank you, Nilanjana. Hope to
Thank you
have you
so much,
again.
sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for
Thank you,
joining.
sir. Nilanjana ma'am, thank you
Thanks so
again
much, Arunima.
for the interesting
And
session and for sharing your valuable time with us. I thank the participants as well for being with us today. We can close today's session with a moment of peaceful silence.